The Academy of Corvash Prime had stood for 3,000 cycles, untouched, unbeaten, unconquered. Its walls were forged from compressed neutronium, its reputation built on the broken spirits of countless cadets who dared to believe they could survive its trials. And I, Commander Vrel of the Thousand Suns Imperium, had served as its chief tactical instructor for 200 cycles without a single graduate earning top honors. Then she arrived. The human, Sienna Cade. I should have known something was wrong the moment she walked through those gates. Humans were supposed to be soft, fragile things. The preliminary reports described them as emotional creatures who cried over fictional stories, and adopted creatures that could kill them. Pets, they called them. The entire concept made my secondary brain ache. But this one? This one had the audacity to smile at me during orientation. "Commander Vrel," she said, extending one of her ridiculous 5-fingered appendages toward me. "Looking forward to your class." Looking forward to it. As if the tactical warfare course was some leisurely activity instead of the most brutal mental and physical gauntlet in the known galaxy. I stared at her hand, dangling there in the recycled air between us, and felt my mandibles click in irritation. "Cadet Cade," I replied, deliberately ignoring the gesture. "You will address me as Sir. You will follow protocol, and you will most certainly not look forward to anything in my curriculum, because I promise you, by the end of your first rotation, you will be begging your transport captain to take you back to whatever backwater planet spawned you." She lowered her hand slowly, and that smile, that infuriating expression of warmth and humor, never wavered. "Understood, sir. Can't wait." I assigned her to Pod 7. The Death Pod, we called it, though never officially. It was reserved for cadets we wanted to wash out quickly. The simulation parameters were set to impossible. The physical requirements exceeded what most species could achieve with cybernetic enhancement. The mental stress protocols had driven 3 previous occupants to voluntary psychological restructuring. She lasted 6 hours on her first day before collapsing. I felt a surge of satisfaction as the medical drones carried her to the recovery bay. Another human, broken and defeated. Her species would learn that the Imperium's military was no place for creatures who valued feelings over function. But then she came back. Day 2, she lasted 8 hours. Day 3, 10. By the end of the first week, she was completing the full rotation, and my satisfaction had curdled into something else. Something I was not accustomed to feeling. Concern? No. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe just confusion. "The human," my second-in-command, Instructor Thax, said during our daily briefing. His translator rendered his chittering into standard Imperium dialect. "She is, how do you say, performing adequately." "Adequately," I corrected, my voice sharp. "And barely. She meets minimum standards, nothing more. Increase the difficulty parameters by 15%. Thax's carapace shifted colors, the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Sir, that would put her simulation beyond what we require of senior cadets." "Did I ask for your opinion, Instructor?" "No, sir." "Then implement the changes." The next morning, I watched her enter the simulation chamber through the observation deck. Pod 7 was a marvel of technology, capable of generating any combat scenario imaginable. Today, I had programmed a particularly nasty one. A hostage rescue on a deteriorating orbital station with hostile gravity fluctuations, toxic atmosphere, and enemy combatants equipped with weapons 2 generations ahead of standard issue. She would fail. She had to fail. The scenario was mathematically unsolvable. Sienna stood in the center of the pod as the simulation initialized around her. The walls dissolved into the fractured hull of the station, alarms screaming, bodies floating in zero gravity, enemy markers appearing on her heads-up display faster than any organic mind could process. And then she laughed. Laughed. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she said, her voice crackling through the comm system. "Okay, Vrel, let's see what you've got." What happened next should not have been possible. Instead of following standard protocol, establishing a secure position, assessing threats, she immediately ejected her weapon's power cell and threw it at the nearest cluster of enemies. The cell detonated, creating a temporary electromagnetic pulse that disabled their shields. She used the resulting chaos to vault through the zero-gravity environment, grabbing a floating piece of debris and using it as a shield while simultaneously hacking into the enemy communication network through her wrist terminal. "This is Cadet Cade to all hostile forces," she broadcast, her tone conversational. "I'm about to make this really embarrassing for you. You might want to surrender now." They did not surrender. They opened fire. She twisted through the incoming barrage with movements that defied what I knew about human physiology. Later, I would learn that humans possessed something called proprioception, an unconscious awareness of their body's position in space. Combined with their remarkably fast neural processing for a biological species, it allowed for reactive movements that seemed almost precognitive. But in that moment, watching her navigate certain death like it was a recreational activity, I could only stand there, all four of my eyes wide, my translator struggling to form words. She completed the scenario in 22 minutes. The previous record, held by a Kronar berserker with military-grade augmentation, was 41 minutes. When she emerged from the pod, sweat dripping down her face, her uniform torn in 3 places, she looked up at the observation deck, directly at where I stood, and gave me a small salute. "How'd I do, sir?" I said nothing. I could not trust my voice not to betray the alien emotion churning through my neural clusters. That night, I reviewed the footage 17 times. Each viewing revealed new impossibilities. Moments where she should have died, but somehow anticipated the threat before it materialized. Tactical decisions that violated every principle we taught, but somehow achieved the objective. And that constant, maddening thread of humor running through her communications, as if she were enjoying herself. The other instructors began to notice. "The human completed the Gauntlet of Thorns in record time," Instructor Zell reported during morning briefing. Her scales were flushed orange, indicating excitement. She used a debris field as cover, calculated ricochet angles for her plasma rounds, and eliminated all targets without taking a single hit. "Impossible," Instructor Kryn rumbled. His species rarely showed emotion, but I detected skepticism in his subharmonic tones. "The gauntlet requires cybernetic targeting assistance." "She did it with organic visual processing," Zell insisted. "I reviewed the biometric data myself. No enhancements. Pure biology." I felt my mandibles grind together, an unconscious stress response. "Then we have not pushed her hard enough. Instructor Kryn, you will personally design her next trial. Make it painful." Kryn's smile was not pleasant. His species had 37 words for suffering, and he knew how to implement every single one. 3 days later, Sienna entered what we called the Maze of Echoes. It was a psychological warfare simulation designed to break mental fortitude through sensory manipulation, cognitive dissonance, and targeted fear responses. The maze adapted to each cadet's personal psychological profile, creating scenarios specifically designed to exploit individual weaknesses. For humans, we had developed particularly effective parameters, They were social creatures, dependent on emotional connections. The maze would show them their loved ones dying, their homes burning, their entire species facing extinction while they stood helpless. I expected tears. I expected begging. I expected her to trigger the emergency exit protocol within minutes. Instead, I got singing. You know what's funny about fear? Her voice echoed through the maze's speakers. She was walking calmly through corridors filled with images of Earth burning, cities crumbling, her own family screaming. Fear is just your brain trying to keep you alive. But here's the thing, Commander Vrel, because I know you're watching. My brain already knows this is fake. She stopped in front of a projection showing her mother, or what our psychological profile suggested was her mother, reaching out with burning hands. Nice try, though, she said softly. The detail work is really impressive, but my actual mom is way scarier than this when I forget to call her. And then she walked through the projection and continued, down the corridor, humming some tuneless human melody. Instructor Crin's bewilderment was palpable through the comm system. She is not responding to any of the fear stimuli, sir. The psychological profile must be incorrect. Run a full diagnostic, I ordered. Check for cybernetic emotional dampeners. The diagnostic came back clean. She was doing this with nothing but her organic brain and, apparently, an absolutely baffling sense of humor. By week 4, the other cadets had noticed her too. The academy housed 200 students from 47 different species, representing the Imperium's most promising military recruits. They had all heard the stories. The human who laughed at impossible scenarios. The cadet who treated Commander Vrel's death simulations like entertainment. Some admired her. Others feared her. Most just tried to stay out of her way. But there was one who made the catastrophic mistake of confronting her directly. Cadet Threx was a Vorgon, one of the warrior caste known for their aggression and territorial nature. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, possessed 4 arms ending in bone blades, and had a documented history of challenging authority through physical intimidation. He cornered her in the commissary during meal period. "Human," he growled, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining hall. "You mock our traditions. You disrespect our instructors. You do not belong here." Sienna looked up from her food, that ever-present smile playing at her lips. "Oh, hey, Threx, want to sit down? The nutritional pace today is only mildly horrifying." His battle crest flared, a threat display that had sent smaller species fleeing. "I challenge you, weak blood. Combat trial, no weapons, no mercy. We will see how long your laughter lasts." Every eye in the commissary turned to her. Even I, observing from my private monitoring station, felt my respiratory systems accelerate. Vorgon combat challenges were brutal affairs. Threx outweighed her by at least 100 kilograms. His natural weapons could shred armor. His species had evolved specifically for warfare. She should have declined. Should have reported the challenge to administration. Should have recognized the suicidal nature of accepting. Instead, she stood up, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and said, "Sure, but I'm finishing my lunch first. This pace really grows on you." The combat arena was filled to capacity within the hour. Word had spread through the academy like a viral program. The human who could not be broken was going to fight Threx the Destroyer, who had never lost a challenge. I took my place in the instructor's observation box, telling myself I was only there to ensure proper protocol. Not because I was curious, not because some illogical part of my neural network wanted to see if she would survive. They faced each other in the center of the arena. Threx, in his full warrior regalia, battle crest fully extended, all 4 arms, flexed and ready. Sienna, in her standard cadet uniform, looking impossibly small and fragile. "Any last words, human?" Threx asked. She tilted her head, considering. "Yeah, actually. Do you know what humans are really, really good at?" He did not answer, already moving, closing the distance between them with the speed of a predator. "Adapting," she finished. And then she did something I had never seen in 200 cycles of observing combat trials. She ran away. Not fled. Not panicked. She ran with purpose, using the arena's obstacles, forcing Threx to follow her through tight spaces where his size became a disadvantage. And while she ran, she talked. "See, the thing about humans," she called out, vaulting over a barrier while Threx smashed through it, "is that we're not the strongest, or the fastest, or the toughest, but we're incredibly stubborn." He swung at her with two arms simultaneously. She ducked, rolled, came up already moving. And we learn really, really fast. The fight lasted 18 minutes. By the end, Threx was exhausted, heaving for breath, his swings becoming wild and uncoordinated. Sienna had barely broken a sweat. She had not landed a single strike, but she had not needed to. She had simply worn him down. When he finally collapsed, too exhausted to continue, she walked over and extended her hand. That same gesture she had offered me on the first day. "Good fight," she said. "Want to grab some of that terrible nutritional paste? I'm buying." Threx stared at her hand for a long moment. Then, something remarkable happened. He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that started in his thorax and rolled through the arena. "You are insane, human," he said, grasping her wrist in the Vorgon gesture of respect. "But I like you." That night, I found myself unable to enter regeneration sleep. Instead, I replayed the day's events, analyzing them from every angle. The human, Sienna Cade, had not just survived. She was thriving. And more disturbingly, she was changing the academy itself. Cadets who had never spoken to each other were forming training groups. Species with documented historical conflicts were working together. And at the center of it all was this small, fragile human with her impossible smile and her even more impossible results. I made a decision. The next morning, I called her to my office. She entered with that characteristic confidence, standing at attention, but somehow making it look casual. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Cadet Cade," I began, my translator carefully modulating my tone to convey what I hoped was authority. "In 4 days, the Academy will host the Crucible." Her expression shifted slightly. Even she knew what that meant. The Crucible was the Academy's ultimate trial, a 5-day combat simulation that tested every skill, every limit, every breaking point. It was typically reserved for final cycle cadets, and even then, the failure rate approached 60%. "You are a first cycle cadet," I continued. "By all regulations, you should not be eligible for another 2 cycles. However, I am making an exception." Something flickered across her face. For the first time since meeting her, I saw doubt. "Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but this is not a request, cadet. This is an order. You will participate in the Crucible. And I promise you, everything you have experienced so far has been preparation for this. The Crucible does not care about your humor, your adaptability, or your stubborn human nature. It will test the core of who you are, and it will find you wanting." She was quiet for a moment. Then that smile returned, but this time it looked different. Harder, more determined. "Understood, sir. When do I start?" "In 4 days. Use your time wisely. Dismissed." She saluted and turned to leave. But at the doorway she paused. "Commander Vrel?" "Yes, cadet?" Thank you. I wanted to tell her not to thank me, that I was setting her up for the most brutal failure of her life, that the Crucible had broken cadets twice her size and experience, that she should be terrified, not grateful. But she was already gone, and I was left alone in my office, wondering for the first time in 200 cycles if I had made a terrible mistake. Or perhaps, just perhaps, if she was going to do something impossible once again. The 4 days before the Crucible passed like a countdown to an execution. I told myself I was simply observing standard protocol, monitoring a high-risk cadet's preparation. That was why I checked the training room logs 17 times per cycle. That was why I reviewed her nutritional intake reports. That was why I found myself standing outside the observation deck at odd hours, watching her run solitary drills. It was definitely not concern. Instructors did not feel concern for cadets who were foolish enough to accept impossible challenges. Sienna spent those days differently than I expected. While other cadets preparing for the Crucible obsessed over weapon specs and tactical manuals, she did something peculiar. She talked to everyone: the maintenance crew, the kitchen staff, the medical technicians. Even old Grax, the custodial worker who had been at the academy longer than most of the current faculty, and who everybody knew was actually a retired intelligence operative who had seen things that would make your neural pathways spontaneously combust. "What is she doing?" Instructor Thax asked, watching her share a meal with 3 sanitation workers in the lower commissary. "Building a support network," Instructor Zell observed, her scales shifting to a thoughtful purple. "Humans are social creatures. She is strengthening her psychological resilience through interpersonal connections." "She is wasting time," I snapped. "The Crucible does not care about friendships." But I was wrong. I was so catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. The Crucible began at dawn on the 5th day. 23 cadets entered the massive simulation complex, a facility that occupied 3 underground levels and could generate environments ranging from Arctic wastelands to volcanic hellscapes. The rules were simple and brutal. Survive 5 days. Complete objectives as they appear. Failure means immediate extraction and academic probation. Death, while simulated, felt entirely real thanks to neural feedback systems that replicated pain at 98% accuracy. The academy staff gathered in the central control room, a cathedral of screens and holographic displays showing every angle of the complex. Headmaster Corvin himself attended, his ancient frame folded into the observation throne. "This cycle's Crucible includes enhanced difficulty parameters," he announced, his voice like grinding stone. "We have incorporated 3 wildcard scenarios and increased hostile encounter frequency by 20%. Let us see which of our cadets possess true warrior spirit." His eyes, all 6 of them, fixed on me. "I understand you have entered a first-cycle cadet, Commander Vrel. A human." "Yes, Headmaster." "Bold, or perhaps foolish. We shall see which." He gestured at the screens. "Begin the trial." The simulation initialized. 23 cadets materialized in different sections of the complex, each alone, each facing their first challenge. I pulled up Sienna's feed. She stood in what appeared to be an abandoned mining facility, emergency lighting casting everything in sickly red. Her heads-up display flickered to life, showing her first objective: secure the power core 3 levels down, activate the emergency beacon, and hold position for extraction. Standard infiltration scenario. Difficult but manageable for experienced cadets. Then the twist activated. The facility shuddered. Alarms screamed. Her display updated with new information. Catastrophic structural failure in progress. Estimated collapse time, 45 minutes. Enemy forces inbound. Civilian personnel trapped in lower levels. Not standard at all. That is the enhanced scenario? Instructor Kryn asked. That is, significantly more complex than previous crucibles. The human wanted a challenge, I said, keeping my voice flat. She shall have one. Sienna stood motionless for exactly 3 seconds. I watched her biometric readouts. Heart rate elevated, but stable. Stress hormones present, but not overwhelming. Neural activity spiking in patterns consistent with rapid problem-solving. Then she moved, but not toward her objective. She went deeper into the facility, toward the trapped civilians. Foolish, Headmaster Corvin rumbled. The objective is clear. Civilians are secondary concerns, environmental obstacles meant to add pressure. She wastes precious time. I said nothing, because I was beginning to understand something that our entire military doctrine had perhaps missed about humans. They did not think like us. Sienna reached the civilian area, a collapsed section where holographic miners were trapped beneath rubble. The AT simulation was remarkably detailed. I could hear their cries for help, see the terror in their artificially generated faces. Most cadets ignored them entirely, or, at best, marked their location for theoretical rescue teams. She started digging them out. What is she doing? Thax chittered nervously. She has 42 minutes remaining. The objective requires at least 30 minutes to complete. She is failing, Corvin stated. Mark her extraction time. But then something unexpected happened. As she freed the first civilian, the hologram did not simply disappear as they typically did. Instead, it stood, looked at her, and said, "There are tools in the storage bay. Level 2. Take them. Hurry." She nodded, freed 2 more civilians who pointed her toward a hidden access shaft. And suddenly, she was moving through the facility 3 times faster than the designed route. I did not program that interaction, the simulation technician said, his voice confused. The civilians are not supposed to provide tactical information. Then how? Instructor Zell began. She hacked the scenario, I said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at me. She recognized the simulation parameters, understood that the civilians were interactive elements, and gambled that showing them compassion would trigger positive responses. She turned environmental obstacles into tactical assets. On screen, Sienna burst into the power core chamber with 7 minutes to spare, activated the beacon, and immediately began fortifying her position using tools and information provided by the very elements of the scenario designed to hinder her progress. When the enemy forces arrived, she was ready, but more than ready. She was having fun. "Come on, then," she shouted at the incoming hostiles, grinning like a maniac. "Let's see what you've got." The firefight was spectacular. She used the unstable facility against her enemies, collapsing corridors behind her, venting atmosphere into their approach vectors, and maintaining a constant stream of tactical chatter that seemed designed purely to irritate them into making mistakes. "Hey, hostile Team Alpha, your formation is really sloppy. Did you guys even go to military school?" "Hostile Team Beta, I can hear you breathing through the walls. Might want to work on your stealth skills." "Is that really your best shot? My grandmother throws better grenades, and she is 73 Earth years old." By the time extraction arrived, she had held the position for the full duration, eliminated 47 enemy combatants, and somehow managed to save 3 of the civilian holograms who were definitely not supposed to survive the scenario. Day 1 complete. She climbed out of the simulation pod, soaked in sweat, her hands shaking from adrenaline crash. But she was smiling. "How was that, sir?" she asked, looking directly at the camera she somehow knew I was watching through. Headmaster Corvin turned to me. Your human is, unorthodox. Yes, Headmaster. Continue observation. I wish to see if this is luck or capability. It was not luck. Day 2 threw a hostage negotiation scenario at her, a situation where armed extremists held 50 civilians in a transit station. Standard doctrine required careful psychological manipulation, tactical positioning, and, if necessary, overwhelming force. She walked in the front door, unarmed, hands raised, and started talking. For 6 hours. She negotiated with the extremists, learned their grievances, found common ground, and somehow, impossibly, convinced them to release all hostages peacefully. When the simulation ended, the terrorist leader AI literally hugged her and thanked her for listening. That has never happened, the simulation technician said, his voice filled with awe. In 3,000 cycles of running that scenario, not once has anyone achieved a non-violent resolution. Day 3 was a survival scenario in Arctic conditions with limited supplies and hostile wildlife. She built shelter, established water purification, created rudimentary fishing equipment from spare parts, and spent her evenings singing songs to keep morale up. Her morale. She was alone in a frozen wasteland, but she sang anyway. Day 4 nearly broke her. The scenario was psychological warfare, isolation combined with sensory manipulation and targeted trauma responses. Each cadet experienced their worst fears, their deepest regrets, their darkest moments made horrifyingly real through neural interface. I watched her biometrics spike into dangerous territory, watched her collapse in the simulation pod, tears streaming down her face, her body convulsing with sobs. For the first time, I saw her mask crack, revealing the genuine person beneath. "Extract her," I ordered. "Sir?" the technician asked. "Extract her now. She has reached psychological limits." "Negative, Commander." Headmaster Corvin's voice cut through the room like a blade. "She entered the crucible voluntarily. She will complete it, or fail it on her own merits. She is suffering. She is growing." His eyes fixed on me. "Or did you think military training was supposed to be comfortable?" So I watched her break down, watched her scream at phantoms only she could see, watched her curl into a ball and shake like she was dying. And then, impossibly, I watched her stand up. "Okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Okay. You showed me everything I am afraid of, everything that hurts, everything I have lost and will lose." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "But here is what you did not show me. You did not show me what I am fighting for. You did not show me the people I love who are counting on me. You did not show me that pain is temporary, but giving up lasts forever." She started walking forward through the nightmare simulation, and with each step, I watched her biometrics stabilize. "My mom taught me something," she continued, talking to herself, to the simulation, to whatever gods humans believed in. She said that bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is being absolutely terrified and doing the right thing anyway. So come on then. Show me worse. I will walk through every horror you can create, because on the other side is the finish line, and I did not come this far to quit now. The simulation threw everything at her, every documented human fear, every psychological torture our database contained. And she walked through all of it, tears streaming, voice breaking, but never stopping. When day 4 ended, she crawled out of the pod and immediately vomited into a disposal unit. Her hands would not stop shaking. Her eyes were red and swollen. But she showed up for day 5. The final trial was elegant in its simplicity. A straightforward combat scenario against overwhelming odds. Hold a position against endless waves of enemies for 12 hours, or until ammunition and energy reserves depleted. It was designed to be unwinnable. The point was not to succeed, but to demonstrate how long a cadet could fight before inevitable defeat. Sienna lasted 30 minutes before her ammunition ran out. 45 minutes before her energy shields failed. At the 1-hour mark, she was fighting with improvised melee weapons and pure determination. At 2 hours, she was using her bare hands, and she was still laughing. "Is that all you have got?" she screamed at the advancing enemy forces, blood streaming from a dozen wounds that the neural feedback made feel entirely real. "Come on! My academy instructors are scarier than you." In the control room, nobody spoke. We simply watched this impossible human refuse to stay down, refuse to surrender, refuse to quit, even when continuation was mathematically pointless. At hour 3, she could barely stand. At hour 4, she was crawling. At hour 5, she was simply laying in her defensive position, no longer moving, but her eyes were still open, still tracking enemy movements. "Extract her," Headmaster Corvin ordered quietly. "She has proven her point." The simulation ended. Medical teams rushed to the pod as she emerged, helping her stumble toward the medical bay. But before they could take her away, she looked up at the observation window. And she saluted. Not a regulation salute. A sloppy, exhausted, barely coordinated gesture. But a salute nonetheless. I found myself standing, my hand moving to return it before I consciously realized what I was doing. "Extraordinary," Headmaster Corvin said. "In 3,000 cycles, I have never witnessed such determination, such refusal to accept defeat." He turned to me. "You were correct to challenge her, Commander Vrel. She has taught us all something today." "What is that, Headmaster?" "That perhaps we have been measuring strength incorrectly. We focus on physical capability, tactical efficiency, ruthless pragmatism, but we forget that sometimes the strongest warriors are not those who win easily, but those who refuse to stop fighting even when victory is impossible." The other cadets completed their crucibles over the following hours. Some passed, some failed, all were changed by the experience, but none matched what Sienna had accomplished. When the final rankings were posted, her name sat at the top despite being a first-cycle cadet. The other students gathered around the board in stunned silence. "How?" Threx asked, genuinely confused. "She is so small, so weak physically. How did she beat all of us?" I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. "Because while you were trying to beat the crucible, she was trying to survive it. There is a difference. One approach seeks victory, the other refuses defeat. Sometimes the second is more powerful." 3 days later, fully recovered from the medical bay, Sienna was called to an assembly in the Grand Hall. The entire academy attended. Students, instructors, support staff, even old Grax who never attended anything. Headmaster Corvin stood at the podium, ancient and imposing. "Cadet Sienna Cade, step forward." She walked to the center of the hall, still moving a bit stiffly from her injuries, her uniform perfectly pressed despite everything. "In 3,000 cycles of operation," Corvin began, "this academy has produced some of the finest military minds in the Imperium. Warriors, strategists, leaders. But rarely do we encounter someone who redefines our understanding of what those words mean." He held up a medal, a small piece of metal that carried immense weight. The Star of Excellence, awarded to fewer than 20 cadets in the Academy's entire history. "You have demonstrated courage, creativity, resilience, and something we rarely see in military training. You have demonstrated hope, the belief that even in impossible situations, there is a path forward if you refuse to give up searching for it. He placed the medal around her neck. The hall erupted in applause, but I noticed she looked uncomfortable with the attention. However, Corvin continued, and the hall fell silent again, you have also demonstrated a complete disregard for protocol, a tendency toward insubordination, and a troubling habit of treating serious military exercises as personal entertainment. Oh no. Therefore, in addition to recognizing your achievements, we must also assign appropriate consequences for your numerous infractions. He paused, and I swore I saw amusement flicker across his ancient features. You are hereby assigned to serve as Commander Vrel's personal assistant for the remainder of your time at this academy. You will attend all his classes, assist with all his training programs, and learn firsthand what it means to maintain military discipline. Her eyes went wide. My mandibles clicked in shock. Dismissed, Corvin said. The assembly broke up, students chattering excitedly. Sienna made her way toward me, that familiar smile creeping back onto her face despite her obvious attempt to look serious. So, she said, looks like we will be spending a lot of time together, sir. I stared at her for a long moment. This human who had challenged every assumption I held about strength, about determination, about what made a true warrior. This impossible, infuriating, incredible creature who had somehow earned my respect despite my best efforts to remain detached. Cadet Cade, I said finally, I hope you understand what you have gotten yourself into. Oh, I think I do, sir. Her smile widened. I think we are going to have a lot of fun. Fun. She thought military service was fun. And somehow, looking at her standing there with that medal around her neck and that unbreakable spirit shining in her eyes, I found myself thinking that perhaps she was right. Perhaps, just perhaps, we could learn to have fun while still maintaining the discipline and excellence that the Imperium demanded. Or perhaps she would drive me completely insane within the first week. Only time would tell. Report to my office at dawn, Cadet, I ordered. We have much work to do. Yes, sir, she replied, snapping off a perfect salute that somehow still managed to look casual. Looking forward to it. Of course she was. As she walked away, Instructor Thax approached me, his translator rendering his chittering into something resembling amusement. Sir, I believe this will be, an interesting arrangement. That is one word for it, I muttered. But as I watched Sienna stop to talk with a group of younger cadets, saw them hang on her every word, saw the way she had already begun changing the culture of this institution simply by existing within it, I realized something profound. She had not just survived the crucible. She had not just earned top marks or proven human capability. She had broken the Academy's rules, shattered its assumptions, and rebuilt them into something better, something stronger, something more resilient. The Academy of Corvash Prime would never be the same. And honestly, despite my initial resistance, despite my wounded pride, despite every logical argument against it, I was grateful. Because sometimes the best lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and sometimes the strongest warriors are not the ones who follow every rule, but the ones who know which rules to break and when. The human had taught me that, and I suspected she was only getting started.